All right, welcome back to the beautiful Pacific Northwest, the land of plaid and coffee in Pac West Bigfoot. This is David, and we're going to get to the encounter story here in just a moment. First off, I just wanted to say one more time, and I always say this, I love saying this because it's just so true. I love you guys. Thank you so very much for being here, being a part of Pac West Bigfoot. The website is back up, and you guys can read some of the stories there. Eventually, I'll probably put these into some collections there on Kindle if you'd like. Also, I just wanted to give some shouts out real quick. First off, to a person who brought the story out in me of my own encounter way back in the day, William Jevning. Thank you so very much. If you guys don't have any of his books, you need to get them. They're really great reads. Also, Bigfoot's Wilderness. You guys, there's some great encounter stories out there with Bigfoot's Wilderness with Mike out there. So get out there, check it out. And of course, what keeps me from hacking and coughing the whole time here? That's right, my Squatch Coffee, the Sasquatch Coffee Company. And right now I'm drinking some of that. I've got some Eye Shine, and it is just absolutely a great roast. So there you go. So get out there, and you guys connect with these guys, period. As a matter of fact, these are not paid sponsorships here for those. These are people that I really actually enjoy here in the community. And I love my coffee, so there you go. So let's get to this week's Bigfoot encounter story. This one is the monster of Elliott State Forest. That moment you are literally running for your life, you start to realize that there's a God deep down inside, and you realize that you don't know him as well as you should. And when you're running from a monster in the woods, well, you better know him. Elliott State Forest, a little forest here in the Pacific Northwest, many folks do not even know exists, but it does. And to be honest, I was there to let the world know that it does. How? Well, I was going to chase the fog and trees, as they say in the photography world. Okay, they say chasing light, but not me. I wanted to chase the fog. But I was not out there long chasing that fog before that what was in it was chasing me. Of trees and fog. I am a photographer by trade even today. And one day back in 2001, I was asked about some of my favorite state forests to take pictures in by a gentleman and his wife on a Saturday morning, where I sold prints at an open-air market. I gave a few names, ones familiar to them, save one, the Elliott State Forest. As a matter of fact, it was my favorite for good reason. Even after what happened to me that, second day and night, I was out there, and definitely not alone. But trees and fog, this is the reason I loved it so much, even today, although I don't go back. The trees commonly found in the forest, in the Elliott State Forest, are the Douglas fir, western hemlock, western red cedar, big leaf maple, and just the red alder. I love that red alder. And being so close to the ocean, the climate is amazing. And when you can't smell the pine on the wind there, you can almost smell a hint of the ocean. That's for sure. So, when the husband and wife were confused about where the forest was or if it even existed, I was inspired to photograph it and make a trip out of it to make sure I took as many nature and landscape shots as possible. I wanted to make it known by sharing my passion for this beautiful part of creation through photography. I also thought it would be a great series, or better yet, a collection of prints that could, in fact, make for a beautiful calendar, even a beautiful coffee table book, too. I was really excited about it, so much so I told my fiancée at the time, and wife and loving mother of our daughter and son today, about the idea. She seemed as excited as I did about the prospects of less wedding photography and more prints and books. That night I planned out my trip, and she came up with ideas of names for the collection and the book to accompany it. Yes, she was that excited about it. The trip would only be worth it if I could stay at least 3 nights. That meant almost 4 whole days to take some great shots. Unsure of the overnight situation legally, I called the Forest Service, who assured me, because of the damp, wet season, I would be there, that it was okay to trip around for a few nights. Basically, there would be nobody there to bug me or arrest me either. Yep, 3 nights and 4 days of nothing but me and my camera. Oh, and something else. Something I never expected. Day 1. So much fun. I am not sure many people know this, but the Elliott State Forest became an official forest back in 1930 and named after the forester, Francis Elliott. I looked up some information on him, so did Kelly. While some information was still floating around, not enough could be found to add much to the textual part of a coffee table book. So, with that revelation, I figured I would take a voice recorder as well in my laptop to record and write about anything and everything I thought would be interesting, including my own experiences, not just the flora and fauna that make up the Elliott State, that call the Elliott State Forest home. I would be gone, well, planned to be gone, Thursday night through Saturday night, and back on Sunday. Who knew I'd be coming home on Saturday morning, let alone running for my life that same morning. I woke Thursday before the sun came up and was out the door and driving the hour-long or so drive it would take to get there. As I said, I lived along the Oregon coast, been a lifelong resident to this day, just not in the same town anymore. But I woke, drove, and finally made the dirt road turnoff I wanted, and was told, and by the Forest Service, that the road was the easiest to use. In the end, it was, and it was pretty smooth. It was a pretty smooth ride, all the way into the interior and tops of the Elliott State Forest Mountains. I finally reached the perfect spot where I wanted to stake my claim, but apparently that claim was already made. Something I did not know at the time. Nonetheless, I pulled over and set up camp in a small clearing that seemed like an old clear-cut area made decades and decades before. It was beautiful up there, and seeing how it was early, fog and low clouds surrounded me, and the mountain I stood upon, as if below were some frothy sea of white, as I stood on my island atop of the world. All was right and good at the moment, and for the rest of the day. Immediately I got to work. I spent my time along one trail that led down the mountainside on the north side. I took picture after picture that day of the hemlock, Douglas fir, and of shrubs and plants I am not sure I'd actually ever seen before. Maybe I did once, but today I was getting to know them better. With my guide to flora and fauna of the Pacific Northwest with me, my camera bag, and tripod, I found beautiful meadows, clearings, and even saw a black bear run through a small clearing chased by her cub. Soon it got dark. Time for me to head back, I told myself, and I said it aloud. Night came. All was quiet. Not too quiet, however, and this is what really gets me today. But there was an incessant owl or owls hooting back and forth and a bird or two still whistling late into the night. Looking back after some research on my own part, I know that was actually the first experience with this creature, one that would continue stalking me into the following morning and day. Day 2, run me through. Morning, and I was very tired. Even as I climbed out of my tent and started a fire, I was both groggy and feeling the effects of a cold morning outside instead of in my warm, comfy bed at home. The night was cold. It was the beginning of fall, after all. Only hunters and photographers came this time of year. And dumb enough to, I laughed and said aloud again. But that bird whistling and hooting all night kept me up, or at the very least, woke me up here and there so often I was the worse for it that morning. But I brushed it off with a black cup of coffee, and the light came from the east. I could tell it was a day to chase fog and trees. This time I would head east, downhill towards a seasonal creek that was running already. There I would take the proverbial milky water and the fall long exposure landscape shots. The trail was rougher than the one the day before. The brush thicker, the trees thicker too, causing it to have more of an ominous mood about the place. However, I liked that fact. It was great for the kind of pictures I wanted to take. What I did not expect was the sudden sensation of being watched. I did. I felt all of a sudden that I was being watched. Of course, I knew it was either a cougar or that mountain mama bear, and I was hoping for the cougar, seeing how Mama was just that, Mama Bear. I stopped, sat my backpack and gear down. unbuttoned my holster for quick access to my handgun, as I was smart enough to bring one, and stood very, very still. I could not see much through the trees and the fog that early in the morning, but I could see movement to the north of me. I was not sure if it was something like an animal or just low tree limbs moving in the breeze, but it was enough to get me moving a little faster and down into the open by the seasonal creek. After about 15 minutes or so, I made it, and the openness of the area did add to a feeling of security, being able to see all around me, and without brush and trees hiding anything, at least not close to me. After about another 15 to 20 minutes, my nerves of steel returned, and I got to take some great shots for the book and calendar. As I did, the sun started coming through, and so did the chatter of birds all around me. It was weird, whistling, like, that was for sure. It seemed sort of, well, I don't know, fake to me. It was like someone was whistling and chirping like a bird, and while it sounded pretty good, it still seemed not quite right, sort of faked. But I kept on keeping on, as they say, and moved downstream, ways a ways, continually stopping here and there for a shot or two, or 30, as it really goes for the photographer. All the while, the birds followed me. It sounds strange to say it that way, but that is how I felt. Eventually, about noon, I recall, I started back up the hill and into the thick of the woods to have lunch at camp and take some landscape shots atop of the world. As I walked on, it was like eyes were planted in the back of my head by the good Lord above, and for good reason. Suddenly, this weird, ominous feeling came over me as I walked through the trees and up the mountainside. The deeper I got into the thick of it, the more ominous it felt. I started seeing things, shadows moving about here and there. I kept my head, though, and told myself it was only trees and shrubs moving in the wind that was a bit stronger midday. Limbs snapped, trees creaked, bushes made sounds like they were being turned into pom-poms as the wind blew through the forest. The shadows still moved about, and once I swear I actually caught a human-like figure sweeping briskly between two trees, but I believed it was my imagination starting to run wild. No, I knew it was, so with grit and determination, I pushed through, and at a faster pace. I felt a bit scared. I think I was being stalked, but not by some myth of the forest, but by a mountain lion or a bear. Nothing crazy like Bigfoot. That never entered my mind at the time. But my mind would be changed. New moon. Finally, it came night. I will never forget. This night I will never, ever forget, and I mean ever. I thought about snapping some shots of the stars for some of that blurred time-lapse photography people love. As I thought about it, I decided to go for it. The events earlier in the day weighed on my mind. You know how you always run through the mental events that frightened you, or at least you had you on edge, and you sift through those memories to see if there was anything at that moment you missed? Yeah, that is what I was doing to myself for nearly an hour or two. Eventually, though, after a great dinner warmed my belly, and the clouds gave way to a sliver of a moon and stars as frosty as the morning had been, the cares and the craziness of earlier disappeared. I decided to take a hike over the ridge and down to a sort of flat plateau. Not too big, but wide enough for me to move around and get different angles of the night sky. Being just a couple of 100 yards away, I felt fine about heading down there. Besides, I had a gun and never had any weird feelings down that way the day before. I made it just after 8 p.m., just in time to see the last bit of clouds dive southwest, a clear sky with a beautiful sliver of a crescent moon sliding up in the east. The stars were bright, and I was almost ready to go. I just needed to place the camera on the tripod, change lenses, and pick my scene. But that was not to be. A bone-chilling, and I mean bone-chilling scream from deep in the woods came loudly through the trees and rang in my ears. I swear I was almost paralyzed, literally in fear at that moment. I did not expect to hear a second one to my left, then the third scream to my right either. I gathered myself for a second, slammed everything back into my backpack, and stood quietly for a second. Again, but even closer now, a scream from my left came, followed by what seemed like loud grunting and, well, a chuckling-like sound. I don't know how to explain it. It was just unnatural and extremely frightening. I started back up and turned around to run. But something in front of me, not 20 or so feet just inside the trees, a large shadow in fact, ran from right to left and disappeared or stopped. I cannot tell because of the darkness. I did see a silhouette, like that of a very tall person with swinging arms, move past, and quickly, like a blur of black, but with some form to it. I turned to the right and started moving, and fast, towards camp. The screams started again, and I have to say, in pain. The coldness of the night, the slapping and jamming of limbs in my in my face as I moved quickly uphill hurt. Not to mention my lungs could hardly keep up and began to fight for air. But the screaming came, and closer still. Suddenly a giant human-like shape ran in front of me, screaming so loud that I tripped and fell. I picked myself up and reached for my holster to pull out my gun. My heart fell to my gut, and my head started getting lighter from the knowledge that I left the gun on the seat of the truck. Fortunately, I had one other thing, a saving grace, if you will, bear spray. Tucked away deep in the camera bag was a can of bear spray I had for nearly a year or so. I took it out in hopes it would be enough to keep whatever these things were from attacking me, if that was their intentions. I believe it was their intention. But the bear spray seemed to be working. I sprayed my jacket with it and started spraying as I ran. I looked probably like a madman, myself spraying and running and spraying all the way up the hillside. The screams got louder. The creatures followed me, but did, I believe, not like the spray. Of course, I think they became more agitated, but they kept the same distance they had before I pulled it out. Coming down the mountain. I finally made it to the clearing where I was camped, and trust me, I dove into the cab, grabbed that gun, turned and stood back on the ground, and shot that thing off twice into the air. I saw a massive shadow of a thing, and I could tell by the flickering of the campfire still burning that I was looking at a massive, tall, and hairy Bigfoot. Its eyes were pale green in color as they picked up what light they could and reflected it back at me. I'm not sure, but I swear that thing's teeth were bared. And as it turned to return to whatever cave it came from, it screamed right at me, shaking me to the bone again. My blood froze, but I kept myself from literally passing out, dove back into the truck, and headed like a madman back down the mountain and home. I stopped, and it took me a few more hours before I even got to the coast. But I had to. I couldn't drive any longer. My picture. I have what they call a blob squatch picture to this day that only my kids and my wife have seen. I'll never share it. It would only add to the noise out there, to be honest. But I know what is there, moving through the trees. I believe I was in real danger, and I mean real life-threatening danger that night. However, I still get out and about to take pictures, even in Oregon's woods. Well, everywhere except Elliott State Forest, that is. Marcus.